All right, welcome to our third discussion in our researchers live speaker series. I am the moderator. My name is Jennifer Blair. I am an associate professor and librarian, so I will be monitoring the chat. For any questions that come up, please do type in. If you have any questions along the way, they will be at the end. Today we are presenting So Great a Cloud of Witnesses, Theological Resources for Curriculum, Faith Integration, and Personal Growth, being presented as a dual role today by Liz Leahy and as well as Lindsey Sinnott. So today, let's go ahead and get started. Lindsey and Liz, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer, and we are so glad to be here and to be with you all. I wanted to just give a little background on So Great a Cloud of Witnesses. In case you're not aware, this comes from a passage in Hebrews chapter 12. It talks about the faithful people who've come before us. And we like to think of that in stamps with the many writers that we have that have written on scripture and faith traditions and their personal walks with the Lord as some of those cloud of witnesses. So we're hoping to be able to introduce you to them today. But first of all, we're going to start with some resources for curriculum and faith integration. And we're going to look at some specialized or topical resources that we think just about anybody on campus might be able to use in their discipline. And we're going to look first of all at some of the resources related to ethics. Now, the way the library sets up collections with ethics, if you have got ethics within your discipline, as most do, you're going to see health ethics and bioethics in with medical topics, and you're going to find business ethics in with the business resources. But what we have in the Stamps library are things related to Christian ethics and where the ethics come from in the scripture. And so we've got a couple of resources that we've got slides up, but we have many more things that are useful here. One of the ones that we like a lot is this Dictionary of Scripture and Ethics. We have this both as a print copy, but we also have an ebook version of it that you can access. And it has just about any topic you can think of. There are articles in it. And Lindsey's going to share a slide of just giving you an idea of what it looks like. And so we picked the topic of poverty and the poor because that impacts many of our disciplines on campus. And this is a sample of one of the articles, and you can see that there is a good bibliography at the tail end. They also do what are called see also notes or reference notes. And it says, you might want to look at these topics as well. And I know, at least for myself, there are going to be topics that would just never have occurred to me to look at. So I find these references very helpful in looking at them. So we might think of world poverty or world hunger, but might not think of almsgiving or collections for the saints. And so these are other places you can go to take a look at in there. Just about every theological resource we have in the library, if it's a dictionary or encyclopedia, have what we call signed articles. We don't think that most theologians are capable of writing an entire resource by themselves. So the wide variety of scholarship in there. So when you're instructing your students or looking at it yourself, you're going to want to check and see who is the author of that particular article that you're looking at. Here's another one that we think is useful, the Blackwell Companion to Christian Ethics. They have longer chapters on various topics. And we'll go a little more in depth into the topic. So here's an example on peace and war that you could see. And then we have specialized ones, Dictionary of Everyday Theology and Culture. And actually one of our faculty members, Keith Matthews, is one of the editors of this dictionary. But it has really helpful topics. And so we're pointing out the topic of materialism, and it has applications in it. So if you're trying to help your students take a big topic and then how they might apply it to their lives. This is a really great resource. You'll also see we have circled Sarah Sumner's name. She's a former theology faculty member here. And so another person who has written on the topic before it, which was on marriage. And then we have other specialized ones, such as this companion to political theology. And you might find good articles, say, on globalization, democracy, on what it means to be a Christian in society. So resources that might be helpful in classes.
So I'm going to take over for a couple minutes here and talk through. So we kind of just talked about some specialized dictionaries and encyclopedias, and these were just a handful of kind of topical or thematical resources and dictionaries that we have that might intersect with various disciplines and topics or themes that might be relevant to them when doing research for like faith integration, or how to sort of integrate or think through theologically issues that intersect with various disciplines. But we wanted to take a little bit of time now to talk specifically about Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias, because as a part of this process, so maybe if you're teaching a class, and if we're sticking, say, with the poverty example, or the poor, right? If that somehow intersects with your class, say, on health or nursing or sociology, et cetera, you may also find passages in scripture that speak to your various topics. And there's a couple ways of going about researching in scripture when it comes to these various topics. So the first thing I'm going to highlight is the Anchor Bible Dictionary. And this might be a resource that many people are familiar with already. We do technically have copies of these in all three of our libraries because they get used so heavily. So they're not just in stamps. But there's a couple things you can do with a resource like this. A Bible dictionary or encyclopedia is going to give you historical background, cultural context on the entries that you look up. Occasionally, we might see a little bit of engagement with understanding of original language, so biblical Greek and Hebrew, and how that has informed an understanding of a topic. But generally speaking, you can look up people, themes, ideas, books of the Bible, etc., and find all sorts of background information about those things and scripture. So for example, Anchor Bible Dictionary has an entry here I just pulled up on poor and poverty. And I took two pages that actually aren't consecutive, just to show you that even though we say dictionary encyclopedia, some of these entries are very lengthy. This is like an almost 20-page entry on how the Bible talks about and engages with the topic of poor and poverty. So you can start thematically like this, where you pick a concept and look that up in an Anchor Bible Dictionary. Or maybe you started with a verse that deals with poverty and the poor, and that might have led you to a resource like this. But in this sample, you can see it walks you through the Old and New Testament and talks through the various words and understandings of poor and poverty and what that might look like. And I'm going to have these little things popping up on some of these samples, so just to remind you that each one does have its own individual author here, and that's kind of important to note when you're looking at some of these resources. Anchor Bible Dictionary is only available in print. Currently, we do not have electronic access to Anchor Bible Dictionary, so you have to use those in the library. This next set that we wanted to highlight, that's a really wonderful resource, is the Ivp Bible Dictionary Set. It basically does the same thing that Anchor Bible Dictionary does, but it separates each volume by area of the Bible. So there's a Ivp Bible Dictionary for the Pentateuch and the first 5 books of the Bible, etc. So sort of chunking scripture up into its various sections. And what that means is, in this example, if you pulled up the entry on rich and poor to gain some more understanding of how the Bible engages with this topic, I pulled the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels. So it's going to have some overlap with Anchor Bible Dictionary, but most of the things in the entry from this volume are going to engage with how the New Testament is talking about this issue, and then what we might learn from that. And usually it'll break down. So how are the poor represented or spoken about in each book of the Gospels in this case? it definitely might have some overlap, but there'll be unique information between those various Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias. The last thing I'm going to talk about in this section is the Ivp Bible Background Commentary. And I'm sort of cheating because we're talking about Bible dictionaries and encyclopedias, and this is technically a commentary, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I included it in this section because the Ivp Bible Background Commentary contains a lot of similar information that a Bible dictionary and encyclopedia would have, with the exception of, in this case, instead of looking up your topic and how that might intersect, so like a theme that intersects with your discipline, you would start with a biblical passage. So I happen to pick Luke chapter 4 here. This is the story of where Jesus is preaching in the synagogue in Nazareth, and he reads from the scroll of the passage in Isaiah that talks about sort of his mission as being preaching the good news to the poor, liberation for the captives, etc. Since it kind of had that theme of poor and poverty in it. So you would look up your verse within this kind of resource, and it's going to give you similar historical information. And it might also lead you to other ideas. So like it's highlighting here how that section that talks about good news to the poor and release for the captives has callbacks to the year of Jubilee in the Old Testament, which might spur further research ideas for how you might engage with a topic like this and your particular discipline.
We're next going to move on to word study tools, and we're just going to do a little brief part of this because we realize not everyone is comfortable working with the Hebrew or the Greek tools, but we have a variety of them here. One of the easier ones and is very lay-oriented, very lay-friendly, is this expository dictionary of Bible words. And here you can look up the word in English and then look and see, is there an Old Testament or a New Testament word or words in use for it? You'll see with the New Testament and looking at the arrows that there are multiple words that are used to represent abide or abode in the New Testament, and only one that's used in the Old Testament. It's going to give you the numbering system. So the number that follows, let's see. Oh, I can't point to it. The screen.
I'll circle.
Oh, thank you. I forgot to circle it in advance. But you can use that numbering system to get into our either our Hebrew or our Greek tools as a way to enter it. Let's see. Looking at the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, and this is a 12-volume set that gives you historical background, context for the concept. Working from the Greek, there is both Greek and English in it. We have the similar set for the Old Testament as well. And we do have an abridged volume that many people find useful for this, that it has more English in it that you can work with. We thought at this point it might be good to say we have 4 resource people for you over in Stamps that can help you out with any kind of word study or any of the research that you see here today. And so you see myself and Lindsey. We also have Steve Young and Sharon Ralston, who are information specialists, who work closely with us. All of us have graduate degrees in theological discipline, and we're very familiar working with these tools, and we're very glad to help you
out. So we want to talk a little bit more about some other resources that might be new to faculty outside of the biblical or theological disciplines, and how you might utilize these for engaging with study having to do with your curriculum or faith integration. And we want to talk about commentaries kind of quickly in here. We could probably spend a whole session talking about commentaries, but commentaries basically do what the name sounds like. So someone, a biblical scholar, will go through and sort of comment chapter by chapter, verse by verse, about what's going on in a particular passage from the Bible. Commentaries are often organized in larger sets where you might find a volume dedicated to each book of the Bible. So if you went to the Word Biblical Commentary, there's going to be a volume for Genesis, for Exodus, etc. So you would already have to have a passage in mind when you are using a commentary, and you would pull the volume that's relevant to whatever passage that you are looking at. This being said, I always share with my students when I'm in classes that not all commentaries are created equal. There are many, many sets that we have in stamps in the Theological Library, and sometimes different sets are focused on different things and used for different purposes. So if you are doing research about a particular biblical passage, it's often helpful to kind of think through or ask somebody, one of us in the Theological Library, what the focus of a particular set might be. So generally speaking, we divide commentaries up into two really broad categories, academic and then application and devotional commentaries. And there's really subsections within that. So on this slide, I've kind of got two samples of academic categories, technical and non-technical. And when we use that language, usually what that means is a technical commentary does a lot more engagement with original language. So if you open a technical commentary, you might find Hebrew and Greek all throughout the information that's in there. That doesn't mean it's not good to use, right? Don't be overwhelmed if you pull one of those volumes off. Just know that it's focusing a lot more on linguistic commentary in those particular volumes. A non-technical commentary kind of blends a lot more of the historical context with maybe a little bit of the original language in there. And then application and devotional commentaries do pretty much with what that sort of title or category sounds like. They're geared a lot more towards how do I apply this particular text to my life today. A couple of things to consider, even within these broad categories, when you are selecting commentaries for passages from the Theological Library, it's helpful to ask yourself some of these questions. Does the commentary have enough information for me? We might have a commentary that has one volume on Luke, and you might have pulled a separate commentary that is a one volume covering the entire Bible. So clearly a commentary that is dedicated to just Luke is probably going to have a lot more information on your passage than a one volume for the entire Bible commentary. Just space-wise, you're going to have a lot more information in one of those. Sometimes it's also helpful to consider what tradition or church perspective does a particular set come from. We have a lot of publishers that are affiliated with particular denominations or church traditions. So you might pull a volume off the shelf not knowing that this comes from a Presbyterian press, which might influence the kind of things that are focused on in that particular commentary. So if that's important to you, it might be helpful to figure out or ask one of us what's the background of this set, or it's helpful in light of all of these things to maybe pull like 3 different volumes having to do with your passage, so you get kind of a wider breadth of information and church denominational insight into some of those commentaries. So I have just a few samples here because I wanted to show, highlight just what some of the differences might be if you were to pull some of these off the shelf and take a look at the inside. So I stuck with our Luke chapter 4. So looking at kind of the preaching the good news to the poor and how that set up Jesus' mission throughout like the rest of Luke, everything that passage in Isaiah talks about that he cites. So as you could see, this is coming from the Word Biblical Commentary, and there's a lot of Greek phrases that are thrown throughout here. This series primarily is doing engagement with language when you look at this, but as you'll notice, it doesn't mean that is too difficult to understand. You might not know what that Greek phrase is that is being pointed out in the passage, but you'll clearly be able to understand the commentary that the scholar is talking about related to the translation of those words and how that informs our understanding of a particular passage. We only have this particular volume in print. We do have a handful of commentaries that are ebook versions as well. But some of these volumes you actually have to come into stamps to use because there aren't ebook volumes available for them. The second sample comes from the academic non-technical category. So you saw a lot of Greek thrown in that last example. This one has a little Greek on the right page there, but it has a lot more information on historical context. And it's a lot, I would say, easier to engage with or digest when you're reading a non-technical commentary like this. This particular set is really great. There's actually 2 volumes on Luke, so you find a lot more information in this set because it's got 2 books dedicated to that book of the Bible. So it's got much more breadth to what it might talk about given related to a particular passage. This happens to be a print only one as well, though. One of the other ones I want to highlight here really quickly is just what the sample of an inside from a application or devotional commentary might look like. This is the NIV Application Commentary. And as you can see, it already looks a bit different than those samples that we previously looked at. It has a tiny bit at the front dealing with the original meaning of the text or passage, but it spends most of its time jumping to what it calls bridging context and contemporary significance. So how do I apply this to my life today? I say this because that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. Especially if you're doing faith integration work, it might be helpful to start with a application or devotional commentary to help you sort of bridge those 2 things, right? How might I apply this scripture? What might it mean for me personally to apply this? And what might it mean for me in the context of my discipline to apply this particular passage? Generally in academic biblical studies scholarship, we would avoid citing an application or devotional commentary. But for like faith integration and curriculum work, some of these are really great. And I like including this volume on Luke because you'll notice that the same scholar that wrote that 2-volume Baker one is the same person who wrote this application volume. So devotional and application commentaries are excellent resources that are written by experts in their field still. The purpose is just a lot different than what one of those academic ones where they're engaging with historical context and language context or literary context, etc. I wanted to highlight a couple specialized commentaries that do different things. This one is from our Ancient Christian Commentary Set. It might be helpful for you to take a look at, or what did the early church have to say about my particular passage? How were people talking about that historically? So when you look up a passage in something like the Ancient Christian Commentary Set, you'll find excerpts from all sorts of different church fathers and early theologians and what they had to say about what was going on in a particular passage or text that you are looking at. We have another series, the Blackwell Companion, or the Bible Through the Centuries, that does a similar thing where you can look at your passage and learn about how it was applied throughout the many centuries of the church. The last thing I'm going to highlight in the commentary section here is just that we also have commentaries that are all written by women scholars. We've got commentaries that are focused geographically. So like the Africa Bible Commentary that we have a South Asian Pacific Bible Commentary Set. So if you are also interested in locating and learning about how biblical interpretation is being done by scholars across the world, like in a global context, we have all sorts of commentaries that engage with that kind of information as well. So it can be a little overwhelming sometimes, but we like to highlight these things to say, don't just willy-nilly pick a volume off the shelf for a commentary. Sometimes it's helpful to chat with us because there might be a really wonderful or excellent resource that's geared towards what you're focusing on, and we can point that out to you from our various sets that we have in the library. Oops.
I guess I will, oh, yep, there we go.
Sorry.
That's okay. I guess I just like to add to it that we picked up commentaries from, I think, every denomination that has produced one. So if you belong to a particular denomination or tradition, we probably have got yours.
Yeah.
If we don't, and you are aware of one, we are interested in knowing about it so that we can add it to the collection. But we're trying to do as broad of a scope as possible. And so that whether you come in or your students are coming in to use these sources, that you can look at, okay, here's what my faith tradition teaches, but let me look outside of that and see what several other Christian traditions teach and see if there's differences on this particular topic. So yeah, we've got all kinds of resources. We tend to put the newest reference book, the newest commentaries into the reference collection so that they can't be checked out, just so that everyone has access to them. And then if we can get hold of a second set, then we put that into the circulating collection so that you can borrow them. And you'll be seeing shortly about some of the ebooks. I know there was a question about that. Wanted to get to that. But I want to tell you about the Faith Integration Collection. So this came about as part of the Luce grant that we had, and I'm going to say about 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago. And I wrote parts of that grant, and this part was for developing a one-stop place on campus where you could go and take a look at faith integration across all of the disciplines that APU teaches. And the reason for this is that there's a lot of overlap within our disciplines. So maybe my discipline doesn't have as much to say about faith integration, but maybe there's a nearby one. And I'll use library science as an example. For quite a while, there were very few resources in library science that looked at faith integration. But I could look at computer science, which is a big part of what we do, or I could look at pedagogy and higher education. I can look at some of these other topics and put together some ideas of what other people have written on. Your discipline may fall into that as well, but we have a variety of sources here. Ideally, they're for you to come and sit and just spread them out on a table and start looking through things. But they do all circulate, so you can borrow them. And okay, and we've got a LibGuide related to faith integration resources. And you'll see all of these gray tabs across the top. You can go to the discipline that's yours and click on it, and you're going to see the Library of Congress subject headings that are most likely to contain resources related to faith integration in your discipline. And so you can scroll through them, and these are in the center screen where the blue writing is on this one. So looking at the nursing one as an example, and you can see aging, religious aspects, bioethics, religious aspects, etc. And click on that. That will take you into the library catalog, and you'll see all of the resources that we have on that topic. So instead of printing out a bibliography, I don't know, every 6 months or a year of the resources we have, you will always be current if you come to this LibGuide and select some of the headings that are going to be close to what you're looking for. I do want to say it's not, the majority of the items are going to be from a Christian perspective, but religious aspects cover all religions. So you're going to see things, a Hindu perspective on healthcare, perhaps, or a Muslim perspective. So there is a variety of materials, but it's a good way of entering our catalog and figuring out what resources are available to you. We've got some sample faith integration collection resources, just to give you an idea of what types of things show up in the collection. So, for example, Kingdom Calling, and this is a book I unfortunately have not read, but Lindsey has, and but it's a resource that broadly covers what a Christian might want to think of, things to think about. Would that, Lindsey, I'll let you jump in if you want to say anything.
Yeah, So some of our samples are kind of really high level from the faith integration collection, so not necessarily discipline specific, like that first example there from Kingdom Calling. So it deals more with how ought all Christians to think through our vocation. So there's a lot of broad application points in resources like Kingdom Calling that you can extrapolate then for what does that mean for me in my own discipline that I teach? How do I think through what it means to be a follower of Christ and to live out the kingdom through my vocation and what I do, what I spend a big chunk of my life and day doing. So we have broad examples, and Kingdom Calling is one of those sort of more broader ones.
We have a wide variety of religion and science materials in our collection, both in the faith integration collection, as well as items that are part of the theological collection, circulating collection. So things like the Quantum Shift book, if you were interested in religion and science, if you're interested in business, librarianship. We've got 2 volumes on nursing. So there's a wide variety of titles, and it's worth coming over and taking a look at. I think you might find every time I show it to someone, they walk away with 2 or 3 copies tucked under their arm that they're going to go check out.
So we also wanted, we're going to segue here to just highlight a couple of things from databases that might be helpful to you if you are doing research related to either biblical studies and theology and how that might engage with various topics related to other disciplines. Most of these databases, well, all of the ones I'm going to talk about right now, at least, can be found under the articles and databases tab of the library website. And then picking either biblical studies or theology from our drop down there to see where these live on our library website. But we're just going to highlight 3 examples today. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about how to structure like your searches in like the databases like this. That's not what we really intended to do. We want to just highlight some tips and strategies or resources that might often get overlooked that we think could be very helpful for other disciplines to utilize. This is the ATLA Religion Database, and this is pretty much the go-to database for theology, religion, biblical studies, etc. Some philosophy,
history,
and yes, some of that is in there as well. You can search thematically, right? So if we were sticking with that poverty example, like you were really interested in looking at how theology engages with that topic, you could just search like you would in a regular database, type in the poor or poverty, etc., and find articles in here that talk about theological and biblical background on that particular issue. But one of the things I think a lot of people who use ATLA aren't aware of is they have indexed all of the articles in here that are primarily about scripture passages and index them by scripture passage. So if you say we're sticking with our sample from Luke 4 and you wanted to find more information resources, etc., journal articles talking specifically about Luke chapter 4 and the passage from that, do not try to type in like Luke 4:1 through 36 into the search box. If you do that, 9 times out of 10, you might get 0 results because the database doesn't know how to interpret a scripture passage like that. You may get some hits, but you're not getting everything by no means when you type that in that way. Use that scripture index, and that will give you a bunch of hyperlinked links that will either dump you in. You can pick the whole book of the Bible, which I don't recommend, like say all of Luke, but there will be the option to expand that into the chapter level. And if you click on those chapters, it will format your search properly to pull all of the articles that have been indexed for that particular chapter of the Bible. When you search that way, you might still find that there is a ton of results. You can always go back up when it formats your scripture passage the right right way and add an additional keyword or topic. So maybe like it gives you Luke chapter 4 and you type in poor or poverty or the year of Jubilee, and it will then refine your search to relate more thematically with your topic in that particular scripture passage. But that's just our tip for searching in Atla if you are doing biblical research related to a particular passage and what that might have to say about a topic that you were looking at. One of the other things we want to highlight, because we think that this often gets overlooked by faculty and students, is our Past Masters database. Past Masters basically has a ton of primary texts and primary works by various theologians and philosophers. And all of this is full text electronic access to these particular resources. So like I have an arrow there to Luther and his works. That's full text to all of that. So technically you could come in here and say, I'm curious what Luther had to say about poor and poverty, etc. You could click on his name and then it'll give you the option to search across all of his works. Or if you don't know who you want to look up and their primary writings, you're just interested broadly in what some of these theologians or philosophers had to say about the topic or theme you are interested in, you can always type that into the search box on the left of the screen. And then it's going to give you a results list ordered by relevance by default, but then who wrote it, so who was the author, theologian, what work has it come through, and then it's going to actually individually list out all of the places in their writings where there was a hit against that topic. And all you have to do is click on it and you can read their works or the primary text of those particular writers and authors in relation to whatever topic or theme that you have searched across for all of their writings that are indexed within here. The next thing I want to talk about here briefly is the Cambridge Companions database that we have. This is, I'm going to say, less of a database because it's not like you're searching traditionally for journal articles in this. These are ebook versions of basically what the print set is, the Cambridge Companion Set, where you get a lot of background reference resources on different people or topics. And these are ebook versions of those. So what this lets you do is search across for your topic or your theme across all sorts of background resources in the areas of philosophy, religion, and culture and where they intersect. So as the sample, sticking with our poor and poverty one, I just did a super broad search across the Cambridge Companions to philosophy, religion, and culture. And you can see there's a ton of results here. I think I got over 1,200 hits here. But what this is doing is giving you results at the chapter level to chapters out of the various Cambridge Companion background volumes that have a hit on that theme or keyword that you have searched here. And there are excellent resources in here. And I think this is very underutilized, especially for the intersection of some of these kind of more cultural issues and theology or religion. There is wonderful resources in here to be able to use when you're doing research in these areas.
Okay, and I'm going to follow up with resources for personal growth. So these are things either for yourself or you may want to add them in for your students. The first one is a favorite of mine. It's called Devotional Classics. And Richard Foster is one of the editors of this. This has probably been out about 20 years. And what I like about it and what you can see from looking at it is that it's got the writings of major Christian writers across the centuries. It's divided into sections. So if you were looking at who are some of the Christian theologians and writers who come to us from the social justice tradition, or who talk to us about what it means to live a holy life in the holiness tradition, charismatic tradition, you can select just those writers. One of the neat things, and my background is as a church historian, and I've read many of these works in the original languages. These are in modern English. It is so easy to read. And typically Basically, they're 4 pages long. Then there's a scripture citation with it. There's a couple of questions to ask yourself as you've done the reading in the area. I have made this book either required or recommended every time I've taught church history. I've just felt that it's so important to have both heart and head knowledge, and this being the heart knowledge. I've also been a teacher at my church and have used this for several times, and the classes, this is their favorite book. They've just loved this. I've given out, I think, about 20 copies of it, so I'm a big fan. I think it's a very useful one to get. But we also have other resources. So things like the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church. If you're trying to learn more about someone, say you were reading on Francis of Assisi, but you don't know that much about him and his background, you can come in and take a look in the Dictionary of the Christian Church for people or theology. You get just a better sense. You get some of the context. And it's just a really wonderful tool to have access to. And then the classics of Western spirituality, I think we have around 200 of these in our collection. There's a lot of them. And it has introductory chapters by scholars on the individual person or movement that's being described. And then it's got modern English translations of some of their writings so that you get a little more background about who they are, what they valued, and what they wrote about, and can be very helpful as you're doing studies on folks. And then celebration of discipline, and this has been popular for years, but it was one of the resources where Richard Foster really brought back to, especially the evangelical church. I think the Catholics in our group had been practicing many of these disciplines for much longer, but on the Protestant side of the house, a lot of this was new. So the idea of what does it mean to be fasting? What does it mean for the various, what we would call the spiritual disciplines? And it's just a great resource, and not only for yourself, but I think it's also a great resource for students. And then if you were looking for these kinds of resources in our catalog, you can use terms to search for, like spiritual life Christianity, spiritual formation. If you just put in spirituality, you're going to get all religious traditions. So you're not going to get specifically Christianity. And if that's what you want, you need to include that in your search.
So the kind of last section that we just want to talk about really quickly is online resources. And it's sort of a misnomer because some of the things we've already looked at were online or electronic things, but how to access some of the ebook versions of our core, especially biblical studies resources. We have a virtual guide that has been created for the Theological Library that has kind of direct access, so you don't have to stumble through the catalog and figure out, do we have ebook copies of some of these Bible dictionaries or commentaries? The easiest way to get there is from our homepage, and then under the virtual library section of our menu, you see the stamps one there. But while I have this up, I just want to highlight that we are always available via chat and research appointments too. So if you are trying to rethink through a assignment for a particular class, so maybe it's a more faith integration assignment in your particular discipline, and want to bounce some ideas off of us or learn about some more resources, or maybe for other faculty, you are writing a faith integration paper yourself and want to chat with us about how to go about doing that. Those are kind of two ways to get a hold of us. But if you open that virtual library link, we have basically divided this up by discipline area. And the most relevant one is going to be the Biblical Studies tab, where you will find a lot of those Bible dictionaries, encyclopedias. The commentaries are organized by book of the Bible. You click on the tab for your particular book, and it's going to list out all of the ebook versions of those print commentaries that we have so that you can open them up right from wherever you are. And then again, we've got our chat if you need some quick help doing research, or if you want to schedule appointments with us, is listed right on here too. But we've tried to make this kind of a easy portal for students and faculty to use to gain access to some of those items that we have electronically. That is most of, I know we just threw a lot of information at you from a lot of different areas. And again, those are just a small sampling of some of the things that we have that we think can be very helpful for you, both in the academic side of things, but also for your own personal spiritual growth, maybe not related to courses or your academic work as well. And so at this time, I think we just wanted to leave it open for questions and follow-up about anything.
Okay, thank you very much. First thing I'm going to do is go through the questions in the chat.
Okay.
And then after that, I will open it up to any questions verbally where you can unmute yourself. So just going from top to bottom. Liz kind of answered this already, but it was in case you didn't look at the chat. Dave asked, in general, what number or percentage of these resources are available online? And Liz responded with, very few are available outside of ebook purchases, but if you wanted to add more, Liz, go ahead.
Just to say, the best place to look is where Lindsey was showing about our Stamps virtual library, but you can also find, if it's not a commentary or dictionary, but more of just a book you want to read that has a theological content, go to the catalog and you can search by ebooks and see. These are not things that you're going to find comparable ones just by doing Google Scholar or Google searching. You got to pay for them. Theology doesn't have these kind of resources as generically available.
And I would say too, up until recent years, and still a little bit, we've been a little bit stymied in theological libraries, because for some of these more core referencey resources like Bible dictionaries and commentaries, etc., at times there have been I don't want to say I was going to say embargo, but that's usually for time period. But usually sometimes publishers have had deals with specific software products where they only release ebook versions within, say, like the Logos Bible software or Accordion, and they're not available for libraries to purchase outside of that. And we're not allowed license-wise to have access to that software in the libraries. Some of them have been opening up much more in like the last 3+ years, where some stuff has been available for libraries, and we've been scooping those up as we are able to, especially because we know our faculty and students are all over the place now, and not necessarily local for us.
Thank you. Some of your print examples have dots on the spine. What does that mean?
Dots on the spine?
I think, are they the mobile cart books?
Oh, yes, that could be the dots. I was like, dots on the spine. I probably just took a picture of, we have duplicates of some of our core material that should sit on our reserve shelf downstairs, and they've been flagged with the little dots so that we know those aren't regular circulating or reference books, because I take them into classes all the time when I go. So we have extras, and so does Liz when she goes to class. We have extras there so that we can just take a whole set of like Acre Bible Commentary or the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament into a class when we are teaching class on how to do biblical or theological resources. So those are just assigned for us, that those are extra books and to be reshelved back down on the reserve shelf downstairs.
All right, thank you. APU has a more diverse population than even a couple of years ago. How do you direct students to works by authors who are more diverse in terms of ethnic diversity background?
Liz, you could jump in too. So we actually spend I would say a lot of time, almost every class that I'm in, and I get into a lot of the undergrad classes, and Liz is in the seminary. So we hit a lot of the GE classes when they're taking their GE Bible classes as well. But our focus a lot in especially the commentary section. Usually I have way more samples than we've showed today. So you'll notice most of the people we highlighted today, just because I kept it short, I always include pictures because it really highlights that in the history, especially of biblical scholarship, it has come primarily from Western European males. So I like to include pictures because it shows who is the scholar or author for that. But usually we have way more samples. We have a ton of resources written by women, written from various scholars across the world. And when we go into class, we specifically highlight those. And a lot of times with our biblical studies classes, it is a requirement that students utilize reference resources that are from non-Western European scholars. So that is a requirement in many of the exegetical papers. So we have tons of those, and we talk through that with students and faculty too when they are in here to try to diversify the resources that they are using. And that's also a part of why we usually recommend you use at least 3 commentaries when you are researching, especially a biblical passage, so that you get some of the diverse scholarship that has been doing. And I should preface this with saying, it's not that the scholarship in the historical commentaries that we've used are bad when they're coming from Western European scholars, but that has been the predominant trajectory. And that means that a lot of things sometimes are overlooked. People from other backgrounds and traditions, and especially areas of the world, see and engage with scripture in ways that has been historically overlooked. So we do try to include that in resources, especially with students when they are utilizing those for class.
I think I would also add to that and say, I know on the seminary faculty side, and I'm sure this is happening on the undergrad side as well, we're looking at all of the syllabi and looking at the required and the recommended readings, and making recommendations as to, you can diversify your syllabus with these particular authors. So we're not only showing people when they come into the library, but we're also trying to help faculty discover new resources. And in case, I'm not quite sure who all's online, but if you're not aware of this, the seminary teaches in both Spanish and in Korean. So we have large collections of Korean language resources and Spanish language resources in the theological biblical disciplines.
All right, next question. Are these research tools traditionally used by other seminary libraries, and how unique is APU's collection?
I can start and say a lot of it depends on the size of the seminary, seminary or Bible school, because these resources are expensive. And so if you've got a very tiny school, they may not have the kinds of resources that we've got. Everyone specializes in certain areas. I will say that the ATLA database is pretty standard across all theological schools. Past masters probably, and Cambridge databases are not. Those are things that, while they're not unique to us, they tend to be with larger schools. Commentaries, if your school comes from a very particular faith tradition, you might not have the breadth that we've got. We've been very intentional in doing that, so that because APU's breadth is pretty wide, and so we want to make sure that anyone coming into the library can find resources that are going to represent their Christian tradition.
So I also like to add, not related to the collection, but you mentioned something about how some schools are smaller and don't have access. They just can't afford the resources. On the circulation and services end, I'd just like to highlight that we do work with clergy and others to allow them to get access to use our services too. So
thank you, Jennifer. Yes.
Yeah, they get to do that for free. Yeah, we don't charge them for that.
Yes, because we recognize that need. All right, so next question. How is the word relevance, a one-word search term, interpreted by search algorithms? Technical.
Okay. Yes, a more technical question. So it's going to, the algorithm behind the scenes is going to vary depending on the database, right, that's being used or what is being searched in. But generally what that means is more weight is given to when your keyword has hits in things like the title field, right? So if we search for poor and poverty and that word or words is in the title, it's going to be assigned a higher rank than if poor or whatever we're searching for has a hit, say, in the notes field where the table of contents is, right? So it's going to rank, the system is going to try to rank the results in a way that it thinks is more relevant or more applicable resources related to where your keyword has made a hit in the record for things. So if a hit is in the publishers field, that might be ranked lower than like the author or the abstract. So some are going to put weight in different places, but basically it's the systems or computers way of trying to present to you the most specific and relevant resources depending on where your keyword has a hit in the record for things.
As you consider bringing in new physical volumes, do you have to make space by removing some already there? If so, how do you decide what to remove?
I'm going to take that one because I'm in the middle
doing it
of
right
a big
now.
project. I'm doing this right now as we speak. So the theological disciplines are different than most disciplines on campus in that you can go back 100 years and the book be absolutely relevant today. And then there's stuff from the 1970s that's not so relevant today. And so what I'm working on right now, I'm going through the ministry and practical theology resources in our library language. Those are the BVs. And I have got charts from our technical services department that shows how often an item has been checked out over the last almost 20 years. And so if it hasn't been checked out, I then look at it and see, but is it, just because it wasn't checked out is not a good enough reason to get rid of something, because the author of the book may be important in the field, but the students didn't realize that when they were making their selections to check things out. So I analyze the authors and do we have other books on that particular content? Is that the only one that deals with, say, drama in Sunday worship services? Or do we have 20 of them? And then I can pull out some of them. So there is a process. It's a slow process. I've been working my way through for the past year, and I've made it to about a quarter of the downstairs section of the library. It's slow going, but it's important work because we won't have room for everything, and we do have to make judgment calls.
And I will say one of the things that has also been helping in recent years, as our discipline's a little behind the game in this, but more and more publishers are starting to open up their resources for like unlimited use ebook copies for things in like theology, practical theology, biblical studies. So not everything, but more than they have historically. So like these last few years, I would say almost like 70% of my budget for books in particular have been on the ebook side, which helps immensely. You don't have to worry about space when we start adding those into the collection instead of the physical copies of those things.
And my budget, only about a quarter of it, because I spend so much of my money on Spanish and Korean language books, neither of which are available as ebooks yet. So it depends what you're looking for, but we are constantly looking at how do we keep the collection fresh. We did all of the reference books over the last 2 years that we've gone through that major work on making sure that we had good current materials.
All right, so can you talk a little bit about ATLA and or CCCU or other organizations with which you collaborate and or share information with?
Yeah, you want to take that? You can take that one, Leslie.
Okay, sure. So ATLA is the American Theological Library Association. and it's our primary affiliation for theological librarians. And although it says American, they're really looking at North and now South America as well. And we have many participants from Europe and other parts of the world. And we have a lot of interconnection. We do an annual conference. We have academic journal. We have a listserv where somebody gets a question that they just can't figure out how to answer. You can post it and you'll get help from other theological librarians or resources. They're an incredibly valuable resource for us. The CCCU, the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities, has a group that's called the Snezek Institute. It's named for a former library director at Wheaton College who was very involved in mentoring many of the Bible college librarians. This has traditionally been just for library directors. They have opened it a little bit wider in the last few years. Both Dave and I have participated. Shelley Harrell, when she was here, has participated with that group. And again, it's just librarians are friendly and helpful for each other. And if you've got a question, I'm thinking about using this software. Has anybody purchased this? I'm looking for this resource. Can anyone help me with it? People will jump online and be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And we're wrapping it up, but before I ask for any verbal questions, I just wanted to highlight that our next talk, called The Gospel of Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46, A Call to Social Justice, will be presented by Dr. Maria Pacino, and that will be on Thursday, April 7th at noon. That will be our last presentation in this series. I will be distributing information after this presentation. You'll see notices through the Provost newsletter, other newsletters, and via email if you're on one of our lists. So if you are interested, do register for that. That will be coming soon. And that is all the questions for the chat. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself. And if there are none, then that'll be it for today. So we'll just give you a minute. All right. I don't see anyone unmuting, so I think we've answered all of your questions. Thank you very much again for attending live. And those of you that are going to be listening archived soon, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. We appreciate it very much. I hope you've learned a lot. And thank you to Liz and Lindsey for presenting today. And we hope to see you again at the next and last series presentation in April. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.